We wanted to check in with Pat Garofalo, former Minnesota Republican lawmaker, now president of the Minnesota Grocers Association. Pat, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Amy. I'm happy to be on.
So those who follow you on social media know that you weigh in quite a bit. I think your comments tend to, and this is I guess if I could give a personal opinion, tend to stand out a little bit more because they do tend to be more moderate, and you do tend to see a couple of different sides and things. So first, I wanted to just ask you a little bit about, because you and I haven't had a chance to talk really in the course of the last week and a half, some of your overall thoughts about what we are seeing here happening and playing out in Minnesota.
Sure. Well, first, Amy, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think the first thing to recognize is that we're dealing with some pretty raw emotions, some very challenging times for Minnesota, and this is nothing new. We're dealing with something, though, that is very provocative and controversial, and that is immigration law. And this is something that has been a bubbling issue, not just in Minnesota, but nationwide, not for years, but for decades. And there are deeply, passionately held views on this issue. And what immigration law is exceptionally complex. And at a time of clickbait and social media misinformation and disinformation, this kind of drills down into our brain and puts us in a position to have very divisive conflicts. But when you break all this down, law, what is, what should be, what should happen, I think most Minnesotans are asking themselves the same question this morning, and that is, how do we end this? Yeah. How do we get out of what Mayor Jacob Frey described as completely unsustainable? And to me, it seems like we have to make policy leaders in Minnesota have to make a fundamental choice. And that choice is, do we want state and local leaders to work with ICE to change their administration and tactics and strategies? Or is the goal to get the federal government to leave Minnesota, particularly ICE, and not enforce federal immigration laws here? One of those is a path that I think is achievable. I think there can be cooperation. We can turn down the volume and work together to make this happen. The other one, the idea that we're going to somehow eject the federal government from Minnesota, have no ICE, no immigration, customs, and enforcement here, that's unsustainable. That's just not going to happen. It would be without precedent in the 250-year history of our country. And so I'm hoping that policymakers are able to get together and work together in a collaborative fashion, because as bad as things are, they can get worse.
Let me ask you about tone right now. What have you seen by way of tone, particularly I think from our state and local leaders here, because again, this is some maybe perception, but it seems like the president's tone has been pretty steady. But have things changed here, do you think, even in the last week or so?
Well, I mean, things have gotten worse, obviously, based off of current events. I should be more specific with the politicians who are involved. Right out of the gate, we had, Mayor Frey dropping expletives. There was a lot of anger that was coming out. Do you start to see, specifically Mayor Frey and I guess Governor Walz, reeling that in now, or how are they trying to navigate this, do you think? Well, we saw a statement from the governor today that kind of personified this different perspective. In the same statement, he said that he was asking the president to turn things down, to turn the heat down, to work together. And then in the same statement, he said that he told protesters to not damage things because Donald Trump wants chaos. Like in the same statement. So I think a lot of what's happening right now, and again, this is an extraordinarily difficult time for us, right? I mean, these are federal laws, and the state does not get to choose what federal laws are enforced or not enforced. However, we do have input in terms of implementing strategy and tactics for how these things are. That's how federal law enforcement and local law enforcement work together in a collaborative fashion. So where we go with that in terms of your overall question of the tone of things, I do think that on an individual basis, there have been some pretty responsible actors, both at the federal level and the state level. And I'd like to, from on the Democratic side at the federal level, U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, has been someone who's been focusing on like, don't blame the law enforcement agents. This is the law. Here in the state of Minnesota, Secretary of State Steve Simon has been urging people to say, protest peacefully, to work together on this stuff. On the Republican side, Lisa Murkowski, again, a U.S. Senator from Alaska, Republican, has been good. Speaker of the House, Lisa Dameth in Minnesota, has also been good. But unfortunately, right now, there's too many of the voices are interested in trying to, they're viewing this as a political campaign and winning a messaging fight. And that's just not going to work for Minnesotans. And so hopefully, like I said, for the most part, I think there's been some good leadership, but there's also been a deficit in leadership that is unfortunately leading us closer and closer to what, as bad as things are, they can get worse, unfortunately.
I have so many questions I wanted to ask you. I think one thing that stood out to me yesterday, one of my colleagues found a Gallup poll article about the number of independents in the country, and it's a record number of independents now. It was over 40%. I thought it was really interesting, and so I wanted to kind of ask you about looking forward now, not even too far in the future. How might what's happening right now on the ground in Minnesota affect the gubernatorial race? The legislature that's about to get started here again in a few weeks. Do you think that this hurts, hurts Republicans? Does it hurt where do you see this?
Well, first of all, I'm actually familiar with that poll that you mentioned, and let me give you an answer that you're not going to get from elected officials. The people who answered that poll were lying when they say they're independent voters. I wish that were true. I wish we did have people who were splitting their ticket, where they would vote for Democrats in some races, Republicans in other races. The reality is, in the last election, over 90% of voters voted straight party ticket. That's what they did. They voted straight Republican or straight Democrat. So people like to call themselves independent. They like to call themselves pragmatic, but that's just not. So sorry, voters. I'm not running for anything, so I can be honest with you. But that's just like what voters are saying they're doing and what they actually do are two different things, and that's a perfect example of it. In terms of what's happening in Minnesota and the election, I mean, if I would have told you 2 weeks ago all these things that were going to happen, you wouldn't have believed it. So I'll leave the political prognostications to other people. But what I will say is that right now there's an asymmetric conflict between the Republicans and the Democrats in Minnesota. And let me explain what I mean by that. Is that for the Democrats right now, if you look at their behavior, they are fighting a public relations campaign. They are mobilizing, organizing, doing a lot of things, having press conferences on TV, and they feel like they are winning the message battle. That's what they're focused on. On the Republican side, they're focused on, hey, we have to indict more criminals on this fraud side. We have to put an end to all the money getting ripped off in Minnesota, and we have to get people who are here illegally deported out of the country. And Republicans feel like they're winning on that more people they are stopping the fraud, that they are indicting people, that they are arresting people who are here illegally and getting them deported. So both sides think they're winning right now. They just have different objectives. And until they get aligned on the what their shared goals are, unfortunately, we're likely to see more of this. I mean, it's easy in concept to say, but they really do need to sit down and figure it out, because the rest of us are just along for the ride.
Ryan, how much more time do we have with Pat? Okay, he's a couple minutes. You want to try to break down the I-90 audits in a couple of minutes? I know that's a tough ask. You tweeted something the other day that caught our attention about the immigration I-90 audit.
I-9, not 90.
I-9, sorry, I had an interstate in my head. I-9 audit. Yep. Thanks, Pat. When federal immigration officials review or audit an employer's I-9 forms to make sure that they're accurate, they have all the employees have work authorization. So that's what the I-9 is. Tell us a little bit about what you think is happening or what you're seeing happen.
Yeah, what's appearing to happen now is, and again, you described an I-9 form exactly right. And in the United States, you have to you have to when you hire someone, they have to prove their identity and they have to verify that they are legally in the country. And employers of all sizes are required to keep that documentation on site. And it's the responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security as well as ICE to do spot checks and verifications to make sure that information is that it exists and it's accurate, that you're not employing people that are here unlawfully. And it appears on public reports and then anecdotally that ICE is stepping up their enforcement of this to do these I-9 verifications to make sure that exactly what I said earlier, that they're here legally and are employed. And they don't need warrants for this information. As long as they provide up to 72 hours notice or 3 business days, they can do that. And so it seems like on the enforcement side, I know there's a lot of focus going into what we're seeing with them pulling people over and doing, going to locations where they're expecting to find people who are here illegally. But there's also this other side of it where it's auditing on the employer side. And whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, and there's a matter of opinion, this is causing a significant disruption to commerce in Minnesota. And if you're a business that's business model has been tied to having undocumented workers, if you've had a model of being able to underbid your competition by using illegal labor, I mean, those businesses are going to need to have a new business plan because that's not going to work going forward. And again, significantly disruptive, but is what you can expect this to happen. But it is, these I-9 audits do appear to be picking up, not only in the private sector, but also at the airport, as well as Hennepin County Medical Center. Those are 2 that are public right now.
Let me ask you just, we have one more minute here. So, the Trump administration, DHS has come out and said multiple times over and over, they're going after, the worst of the worst. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on, does this align with that? Or do you feel like it's starting to broaden out now because there are people who feel like they're starting to, just target a U.S. citizen who may be walking down the street. That's what people are saying they're seeing happen. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, so I would hope that everyone would agree that prioritizing the worst of the worst should be our top priority. Everyone should agree on that. But in the area of immigration, you have a broad spectrum of of individuals out there. So yes, you've got someone who's convicted of a violent crime and they're in this country illegally. On the other end of the spectrum, you have individuals who maybe their parents snuck them into the country when they were 2 years old. They've been here for 20, 25 years. In all practical purposes, they're American, but just not administratively. So how you treat those 2 different cases is radically different. And then you have everything in between. An endless number of hypotheticals. And so when people make these blanket policies about, well, we should not have ICE in Minnesota or everybody should get deported, those are really not sane policies. They don't really make sense. We have to work together to figure out which areas are enforced. But I'll push back a little bit and just emphasize this, that people who are in the country illegally, a lot of times they are exploited by these businesses and contractors. They lower wages in the economy. These unscrupulous contractors, they don't pay workers' compensation. They don't pay unemployment insurance. That shifts the costs onto the rest of us. And so those businesses that are acting inappropriately or illegally and employing illegal workers or undocumented, unlawful workers, whatever you want to use, that does have a cost for all of us. And it results in lower wages for workers. And it's something that I believe that there's going to be more and more consensus around. But those goals are aspirational. How they're enforced, as you can see, pretty provocative, pretty controversial. And hopefully, like I said, hopefully our leaders are inspired to their better angels and focus on getting together and working this out as opposed to having unsustainable positions. I mean, the idea of implementing the Insurrection Act here in Minnesota, that's not good news. We don't want that. So,
do you think it's talk? Do you think it could really happen?
I mean, I think it's a possibility based off of current events. I mean, we've seen, we have a powder keg in Minnesota right now. And all the ingredients are there for people to calm things down, work in a more collaborative way, or to have an explosion of activity and have current events happen that are worse than expected. I mean, obviously last night with people breaking into federal vehicles and pulling a gun box out of a vehicle. That's some pretty dangerous stuff, right? But I would ask people just to use their heads and common sense. Protest peacefully, share your thoughts, but don't take it out on law enforcement agents, whether that's local law enforcement, city, county sheriffs, or the federal law enforcement in the form of ICE or border control. These are the laws in Minnesota, and there's ways to us to deal with this administratively without having physical contact or interrupting or obstructing law enforcement operations. Again, easier said than done, though, Amy. But that's the pathway forward. Otherwise, Minnesotans know that this stuff can get a lot worse. We don't need it. We don't need a repeat and a breakdown of what we had in 2020.
All right, Pat Garofalo, former Minnesota Republican lawmaker, now current president of the Minnesota Association of Grocers. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Amy. You have a good day.
You too. All right.